Welcome to this special Volshield Threat Intel briefing on the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a pretty massive stack of freshly released intelligence.
Yeah, it's a lot to get through this time around.
It really is. It's centered heavily on the World Economic Forum's Global Cybersecurity Outlook for 2026, which, they developed alongside Accenture.
Right, and we're also pulling in some critical context and analysis from InfoSecurity Magazine and Security Week, just to round it out.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is actually pretty straightforward. Whether you're a CEO trying to protect a global supply chain, a security professional on the front lines, or just a curious listener trying to understand why the digital world feels so incredibly precarious right now, we need to answer one fundamental question.
And it's a big one. What war are we actually fighting in 2026?
Right. And to understand the urgency of that question, I want you to picture this. It is 1939, and France feels entirely safe.
Because of the Maginot Line?
Because of the Maginot Line. They just spent a decade and 3 billion francs building this thing.
I mean, we're talking about an undisputed masterpiece of engineering for its time.
Absolute masterpiece.
Yeah.
A continuous wall of concrete forts, subterranean railways, artillery emplacements, just steel barriers so formidable that military minds globally agreed no army on Earth could ever break through it.
It was basically the perfect defense against the brutal, grinding trench warfare they had just barely survived in World War I.
Yeah, the absolute perfect defense. But in 1940, it turned out to be completely useless.
Completely, because the German army didn't even bother trying to bring through it.
No, they just drove their modern tanks right around the edge of it, straight through the Ardennes forest, a route that French military planners had confidently declared was impassable.
It remains one of the most stunning strategic catastrophes in modern history, honestly. France built the absolute perfect defense against the last war.
Right. They assumed the enemy would happily oblige them by attacking exactly where the concrete was thickest.
Exactly. And the reason we're starting a cybersecurity briefing with a history lesson from 1940 is because right now, across the globe, some of the most advanced, highly funded organizations are doing the exact same thing.
It's wild to see. They're pouring millions of dollars into these digital Maginot Lines.
We are essentially watching a profound failure of imagination happening in real time at the highest levels of global business. To understand the war we're fighting today, we have to look at the monster we spent the last decade building our walls against.
Right, because for over 10 years, one specific threat has dictated boardroom panic, shaped security budgets, and just dominated the headlines.
Ransomware.
Ransomware, the absolute boogeyman of the digital age.
And for good reason, Ransomware defined an entire era of digital defense. We all know the playbook attackers infiltrate a network, encrypt a company's most critical data, and completely paralyze operations until a massive cryptocurrency ransom is paid.
Yeah, I mean, we saw whole hospitals having to divert ambulances, oil pipelines shut down, municipal governments literally went back to using pen and paper.
It was the threat that kept every chief information security officer, the CISO, awake at night. The entire cybersecurity industry essentially oriented itself around keeping that specific monster outside the gates.
Which is exactly what makes the massive headline plot twist in this WEF report so incredibly jarring.
Yeah, the data here is a huge shift.
According to their global survey of the people who actually run security for governments and the world's largest enterprises, which, by the way, is the most honest snapshot we have of the global threat landscape, for the very first time since it became a global menace, ransomware has lost the #1 spot on the list of what CEOs fear most.
That's right. Cyber-enabled fraud has officially overtaken it. When the WEF asked these executives what they're most concerned about, the shift was just undeniable.
And the stats here are staggering. We aren't talking about a slight uptick in spam emails, right?
No, not at all. 77% of organizations reported a direct increase in cyber-enabled fraud and phishing over the last year.
77%. But here's the metric that made me stop reading and just stare at the page. 73% of these leaders say that they, or a leader they personally know, have been directly hit by cyber-enabled fraud.
It's wild. Nearly 3 out of 4 executives have a personal story.
Exactly. It's no longer this abstract IT problem happening to some nameless corporation in another time zone. It is the fake invoice that their own accounting department paid. It's the scam text that their own colleague actually clicked on.
And that 73% is just the global average. If you look regionally, it is even more pervasive.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in sub-Saharan Africa, 82% of respondents reported exposure to these digital scams. In North America, it's 79%. It has really metastasized from a nuisance into a pervasive societal threat that's actively distorting markets.
And completely undermining institutional trust. But let me challenge the premise here for a second. If fraud is suddenly the #1 fear, did ransomware just go away?
Not even a little bit.
So did we finally figure out how to beat the encryption malware, or did fraud just get exponentially bigger?
It's the latter. Ransomware absolutely did not get smaller. The WEF data shows over half of the respondents still reported an increase in ransomware attacks.
Okay, so the volume is still there.
The volume is absolutely still there. The shift in fear is because fraud got exponentially bigger, infinitely cheaper to execute, and fundamentally more convincing.
And there's one single catalyst for that transformation, isn't there? Artificial intelligence.
The AI multiplier, exactly.
Because we used to rely on human error to spot fraud, right? You'd get a scam email, and it would be full of bizarre typos, terrible grammatical errors, just weird formatting.
Right, the old joke about the exiled prince needing a wire transfer. You could spot the deception from a mile away.
But AI completely rewrote the economics of deception.
Generative AI allows an attacker to write a flawless, highly personalized spear phishing email in any language on Earth in a matter of milliseconds. They can scrape your company's public reports, learn the exact corporate jargon your CEO uses, and scale that attack infinitely.
Right, the marginal cost of sending one flawless fake email versus 10 million flawless fake emails is essentially zero.
Exactly zero. But the text generation is really just the foundational layer. The nature of the attack has evolved into deepfakes.
And this is where it gets terrifying. We are talking about taking the threat from, I got a suspicious email from an unknown sender, to, I am on a live video call with my chief financial officer.
The mechanics of how these deepfakes work are exactly what bypass traditional security. An attacker only needs a few seconds of publicly available audio, maybe from a podcast interview or a shareholder presentation, to perfectly clone an executive's voice.
Just a few seconds.
Yep. Then they map a synthesized face onto a live video feed. So the employee gets a call. The voice sounds exactly right. The face on the screen has the correct mannerism.
The background looks like the corporate office.
Right. But the instruction to urgently wire $5 million to an offshore vendor account to close a confidential acquisition is a complete fabrication.
It completely bypasses the digital Maginot Line. It doesn't need to brute force a password or break through $1 million firewall. It just walks right through the front door wearing a face you trust.
And this explains why 94% of leaders now expect AI to be the single biggest driver of change in security.
94%.
Yeah. And 87% say AI-related vulnerabilities are the fastest growing cyber risk they face. AI made fraud deeply personal. You cannot download a software patch to fix human trust.
You really can't. And that shift in the threat landscape brings us to a really uncomfortable and frankly dangerous internal dynamic happening inside these companies right now.
The boardroom chaos.
Right. We've established that the threats have drastically evolved, but that evolution has caused absolute chaos internally. The WEF report uncovered a massive disconnect inside the C-suite itself.
There's a glaring gap between the boardroom and the security bunker. As we noted, CEOs now rank cyber-enabled fraud as their top fear.
Because when fraud happens, the CEO feels the immediate, direct financial hit to the balance sheet, right? And they're the ones answering to the board for the reputational damage.
Exactly. But if you walk down the hall and ask the chief information security officers, the CISOs, they still rank ransomware as their #1 threat, followed by supply chain disruptions.
See, I have to challenge this on behalf of our listeners. If fraud is financially bleeding these companies dry, how can CISOs still be obsessing over ransomware? Are they just blindly following last year's playbook? Are they stuck in their ways?
It isn't just stubbornness, I promise. It is how their role is fundamentally structured and measured. The CISO is mandated to ensure operational resilience.
Okay, so they're judged on whether the systems are online.
Yes. When they think about risk, they are thinking about operational technology, or OT. That means the physical systems, the manufacturing assembly lines, the hospital life support machines, the power grid controls.
Then ransomware threatens to turn all of that off.
Right. A deepfake fraud attack doesn't take the server offline. The network functions perfectly. It just successfully tricks a human into sending money away.
Ah, I see.
So the CISO views fraud as a business process failure, while they view ransomware as an existential threat to the infrastructure they are quite literally paid to protect.
Let me try to visualize this. Imagine you are trying to secure a massive, incredibly complex bank. The CEO is sitting in their corner office, obsessively watching the phone lines, terrified of wire fraud, because they can literally see millions of dollars walking out the door through deception.
Okay, I like this.
Meanwhile, down in the basement, the head of security is pouring all of the bank's resources into reinforcing the steel vault door against dynamite, because that's what criminals used last year,
Yeah,
and they are measured on whether the vault door holds.
that's a great way to put it.
They are in the exact same building, supposedly fighting for the exact same team, but they are preparing for two completely different wars.
Taking your bank analogy a step further, think about what happens when those two people have to sit down and agree on a budget.
Oh, man.
It turns into an endless, paralyzing tug of war. The boardroom wants to fund anti-fraud verification, financial auditing tools, and deepfake detection training.
While the security team is demanding that same exact budget for operational resilience, specialized firewalls, and ransomware data backups.
Because they aren't looking at the same threat horizon, the budget gets fractured. Both teams end up severely under-resourced for the specific threats they are prioritizing.
It's two separate teams building two completely different walls, while the actual attackers just drive straight down the middle through the open gap in communication.
Exactly.
But, as fragile as that internal dynamic is, the WEE report highlights a wider global gap that is honestly even more disturbing. Let's zoom out from the internal C-suite drama and look at the broader global ecosystem for a second.
Yeah, the inequality issue.
Right, there is a quiet structural crisis happening regarding massive inequality in cyber defense.
The gap between the organizations that have the resources to defend themselves and the ones that cannot is widening into a canyon. The data shows that 19% of organizations now report their security actually exceeds their needs.
19%.
Yeah.
That is a significant jump up from 9% previously, right?
It is. The elite organizations are getting incredibly resilient. They have the budget to weather these storms.
On the other end of the spectrum.
17% of organizations report having insufficient cyber resilience. They are actively failing to protect themselves.
Wow.
And the brutal underlying statistic there is that 85% of those failing organizations lack basic cybersecurity skills.
85%.
The global talent shortage is the primary driver of this inequity. To put a fine point on it, if you look at smaller organizations, 46% of them say they lack the necessary security skills.
Compared to just 29% of large enterprises, right? And it gets much darker when you look at who specifically makes up that underdefended category.
Yeah, it really does.
The report points out that non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and the public sector are faring drastically worse than the private sector. The public sector reports 23% insufficient resilience. NGOs are at a staggering 37%.
Meanwhile, only 11% of the private sector falls into that failing category.
So the disparity is almost entirely economic.
Completely. A local municipal government or a humanitarian NGO simply cannot compete with the salaries that a Fortune 500 bank can offer a top-tier cybersecurity engineer. They are priced out of basic defense.
That makes sense, sadly.
Regionally, leaders in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean are reporting the greatest shortages, with around 70% saying they are missing critical people and skills. We are relying on the entities that handle our most sensitive citizen data or provide the most critical humanitarian services to defend themselves with fractions of a penny on the dollar compared to the corporate sector.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second, though. Let's say I run one of those massive, hyper-resilient Fortune 500 enterprises. I am sitting comfortably in that elite 19% whose defenses exceed my needs.
Okay, sure.
I have a massive budget. I have cutting-edge AI detection tools. I employ top talent. Why should I care if a small regional vendor, a local public sector office, or an NGO halfway across the world is underdefended?
Because of how interconnected the modern digital economy actually is, you are only as secure as the weakest link in your supply chain.
Right.
The WBF report found that 65% of large companies now cite third-party and supply chain vulnerabilities as their single greatest challenge. That is up significantly from 54% the previous year.
How does that actually work in practice, though? How does a small vendor compromise a giant corporation?
Think about the digital bridges connecting businesses today.
Yeah.
A large enterprise doesn't operate in a vacuum. They give network access to their HVAC vendor to monitor server room temperatures.
Right. They integrate APIs with specialized accounting software.
Exactly. They have shared digital portals with third-tier logistics suppliers. An attacker knows that trying to crack the encryption of a massive multinational bank might take months of effort.
But compromising the local law firm that handles their regional contracts or the vendor that processes their payroll might take an afternoon.
Precisely. The attacker breaches the small, undefended vendor, steals their legitimate login credentials, and walks right across that digital bridge into the enterprise fortress.
Going back to our Maginot Line metaphor, France's brilliant wall of concrete was outflanked because their neighbor, Belgium, was vulnerable. The Germans simply drove through the weak point in the neighboring yard.
It's the exact same concept. Today, your flawless enterprise firewall is completely outflanked the exact moment a hacker compromises the network of a partner you trusted enough to let inside the gates.
And geopolitics is acting as a massive accelerant to this specific risk, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. 91% of the largest organizations report they have changed their cybersecurity strategies recently due to geopolitical volatility.
Think about the trade wars, tariffs, and global instability. Corporations are rapidly reconfiguring their supply chains, reshoring manufacturing, and scrambling to find new regional partners.
They are frantically plugging incredibly complex, highly secure networks into brand new, untested vendors just to keep the goods flowing, hoping the digital plumbing holds up.
And cyber due diligence simply cannot keep pace with the speed of global commerce.
No, it really can't.
All right, so if the technology isn't a silver bullet anymore, if our internal teams are warring over budgets, and our supply chains are fundamentally porous, how on earth do organizations actually survive this?
Well, the WF report outlines solutions, but you have to be willing to change your internal culture.
Right, I want to understand how they work in reality.
Survival requires adopting a philosophy of friction. Organizations have to fundamentally re-aim their defenses. Since the biggest threat, AI-enabled fraud, often involves no traditional hacking or malware at all, you cannot rely purely on software to protect you.
You have to introduce friction into human processes.
Exactly. Verification for payments and sensitive data requests must be treated as critical infrastructure.
So what does that look like? We're talking about massive human resources retraining programs?
It means establishing rigid, out-of-band verification channels.
Out of band.
Yeah, an out-of-band channel simply means using a completely separate method of communication to verify a request. If you receive an urgent email from the CEO asking for a wire transfer, you do not apply to the email.
You open a different application, like your internal messaging system, and ask for confirmation.
Right. If you get a live video call from the CFO demanding money, you hang up the video call, pick up a physical cell phone, and dial a known, trusted number.
Wow.
No exceptions, no matter how much pressure the person on the other end applies.
So you are intentionally building speed bumps into your own corporate workflows so you don't accidentally accelerate a fraudster's plan. That solves the human deception element, I guess. But what about the internal chaos? How do you close that C-suite gap?
That requires unified threat modeling. You cannot have a CEO and a CSO operating in silos. They have to sit in the same room, look at the exact same data, and agree on a combined threat horizon.
The budget cannot be a zero-sum game where fraud prevention steals from operational resilience.
Exactly. They must design a strategy that funds both the protection of the physical OT systems against ransomware and the human training required to defeat AI fraud.
And for the supply chain, how do you secure a vendor ecosystem when you literally can't control their internal hiring or their budgets?
Highly resilient organizations are changing how they do business by integrating security directly into the procurement process. You audit the supply chain before the ink is ever dry on a contract.
You force vendors to fill out zero-trust architecture questionnaires.
You demand independent security audits. If a third-tier supplier wants access to your network APIs, they have to prove a minimum baseline of security maturity first.
You have to ask them hard questions before an attacker does.
Exactly right.
To distill all of this intelligence down to its core, the defining lesson of this briefing is really that the costliest mistake in cybersecurity today isn't having a weak defense.
No, it's not.
The costliest mistake is having a brilliant, heavily funded, impenetrable defense that is pointed at the entirely wrong threat.
It is the ultimate failure of imagination, assuming the enemy will fight the war you want them to fight rather than the war that is easiest for them to win.
Before we wrap up, there's one final thought I want to leave you with, something that builds on this entire shift toward deception.
Oh.
We've talked about how AI is perfectly mimicking our voices, cloning our faces, and bypassing every technical safeguard we have by targeting human trust.
Right.
We are being told the only way to survive is to implement zero-trust architectures and out-of-band verification for everything. We literally have to hang up on our own colleagues just to be safe.
We are engineering friction into our daily lives just to conduct basic business.
But consider the longer-term sociological impact of that. If we are entering an era where believing your own eyes and ears is considered a critical security vulnerability, what happens to human trust overall?
That's a scary thought.
If every video, every voice note, and every urgent request must be treated as a potential deepfake, does the foundation of how we collaborate and connect begin to fracture? We might figure out how to stop the financial bleeding, but is the ultimate casualty of this new digital war going to be our ability to trust each other at all?
And that is a profound vulnerability that no firewall will ever be able to patch.
Thanks for joining us for this Vulshield Threat Intel Deep Dive. Stay vigilant out there.